The crowd is silent. You stand in the center of a stone courtyard, your hands bound, your knees weak beneath you. The air is thick with heat and anticipation. Somewhere behind you, a man sharpens steel against stone, slow, deliberate, rhythmic. You don't know what your sentence will be. No one has told you. In the Ottoman Empire, justice was not always announced, it was revealed. A judge's word could mean exile, imprisonment, or something far worse. Punishments were not only meant to enforce law, they were designed to send a message. A warning.
Un spectacle.
A reminder of power that could not be questioned. From the bustling courts of Istanbul to distant provincial towns, justice could be swift, theatrical, and at times, deeply unsettling. Some punishments were carried out in public squares, others behind palace walls where few dared to speak of what they saw. Official records describe a system of law grounded in religion and order. But beneath those records lies another story, one of fear, control, and punishments that blurred the line between justice and brutality. This is not the version taught in textbooks. This is the reality whispered about in traveler accounts, hidden in court records, and buried beneath centuries of empire. Over the next few minutes, we will uncover the darker side of Ottoman justice, how it worked, why it existed, and what it meant for those who stood on the wrong side of the law. In the Ottoman Empire, justice began in the courtroom, but it didn't always end there. At the center of the system stood the qadi, the judge. He was more than a legal authority. He was the interpreter of law, religion, and social order all at once. His rulings were based on Islamic law, Sharia, imperial decrees, and local customs. On paper, this created a balanced system. In reality, it placed enormous power in the hands of a single individual. A qadi could settle disputes, approve punishments, and even influence a person's fate with a single decision. And while some judges were known for fairness, others operated within a system where status, influence, and connections could shape outcomes. Above them all stood the sultan, the ultimate authority. His word could override any court, any law, any verdict. Justice, in this world, was not just about right and wrong, it was about maintaining control across a vast empire. Trials themselves could be brief. Evidence was not always presented the way modern systems require. Testimony, reputation, and even suspicion could carry weight. In some cases, a verdict was reached before the accused fully understood the charges. And once judgment was passed, the real purpose of Ottoman justice became clear. It wasn't only about punishing the guilty. It was about demonstrating power, publicly, visibly, and without question. Because in an empire this large, fear could travel faster than law. In the streets of Istanbul and across the vast Ottoman Empire, punishment was not hidden, it was displayed. Public squares became stages. Crowds gathered not just to witness justice, but to feel it. The message was clear: this is what happens when you defy authority. Executions were often carried out in broad daylight. The condemned were brought before the people, their fate revealed in front of merchants, travelers, and families going about their day. Some punishments were swift. Others were deliberately prolonged, turning justice into a spectacle meant to leave a lasting impression. Officials understood something powerful. Fear spreads faster when it is seen. A single punishment, carried out publicly, could control thousands. It wasn't just about the individual being punished. It was about everyone watching. Different crimes brought different consequences. Theft, rebellion, corruption, each carried its own form of penalty, sometimes escalating depending on the status of the accused. High-ranking officials could fall just as dramatically as common citizens, though their punishments were often carried out with a different kind of symbolism. What made this system especially striking was its predictability in purpose, but unpredictability in outcome. People knew punishment would come, but not always how severe it would be. And that uncertainty created something even more powerful than punishment itself: constant tension. Because in this world, justice wasn't just enforced. It was performed. Beyond the crowded squares and public displays, another world existed, hidden behind the walls of the imperial palace. Inside places like Topkapi Palace, justice took on a quieter, more controlled form. Here, punishments were not meant for the public. They were contained, deliberate, and often invisible. Those who served close to power, officials, advisors, courtiers, lived under constant pressure. One mistake, one accusation, one shift in favor could change everything overnight. And when it did, the consequences were swift. Unlike public punishments, palace justice was designed to avoid chaos. There were no crowds, no announcements. Decisions were carried out with precision, often in silence. The goal was not to create fear among the masses, but to maintain control within the highest levels of power. This secrecy made it even more unsettling. Rumors spread through corridors and chambers, but details were rarely confirmed. People knew punishment existed, but not when it would come, or who would be next. Loyalty became survival. Trust became dangerous. Every conversation, every alliance carried risk. In this environment, justice wasn't just a system, it was a tool of political stability. Removing threats quietly ensured that the structure of power remained intact, even if individuals disappeared without explanation. Because inside the palace, justice didn't need an audience. It only needed results. The justice system of the Ottoman Empire was not built on randomness, it was built on control. Every ruling, every punishment, every public display served a purpose far beyond the individual case. It shaped behavior, reinforced authority, and reminded millions of people that power was absolute and ever-present. From the crowded courts of Istanbul to the silent corridors of Topkapi Palace, justice operated on two levels. One visible, one hidden. Together, they created a system where fear was not accidental, it was engineered. But this legacy is more complex than brutality alone. The empire lasted for centuries, governing diverse populations across vast territories. Order had to be maintained, and justice, however harsh, was one of the tools used to achieve that stability. Yet behind that stability were countless individuals whose lives were shaped, altered, or ended by decisions made in moments. Their stories rarely made it into official records. They existed in whispers, in traveler accounts, in fragments of history that survived despite being buried. What remains today is a reminder that justice, in any era, reflects the power structures behind it. That systems built to control can blur the line between order and fear, and that history often records the structure, but not the human cost beneath it. Because the true reality of Ottoman justice isn't just what was written down. It's what was felt, feared, and never forgotten. In the Ottoman Empire, punishment was never just about the body, it was about the mind. Authorities understood something crucial. Fear doesn't come from pain alone. It comes from uncertainty, anticipation, and the loss of control. And the system was designed to use all three. People lived knowing that justice could arrive suddenly. A complaint from a neighbor, an accusation from a rival, or even suspicion could bring someone before a judge. What followed was often unpredictable. Punishments could vary not only by crime, but by circumstance, status, and the mood of those in power. This unpredictability created a constant psychological weight. Citizens didn't just obey laws, they internalized fear. They watched what happened to others and adjusted their behavior accordingly. One public punishment could influence an entire district. Inside elite circles, the pressure was even greater. Officials and courtiers operated under the knowledge that favor could disappear overnight. A single misstep could end a career, or worse. This environment encouraged loyalty, but it also bred paranoia and silence. Even rumors became tools. Stories of harsh punishments, whether exaggerated or real, spread quickly, reinforcing the system without needing constant enforcement. The idea of punishment became just as powerful as punishment itself. Because in this system, control wasn't maintained by force alone. It was maintained by making sure everyone believed they could be next. By the 19th century, the world around the Ottoman Empire was changing, and the empire could no longer rely on fear alone to maintain control. Pressure from Europe, internal unrest, and the need to modernize forced the Ottoman state to rethink its systems. The old methods of justice, public spectacles, unpredictable rulings, and silent palace punishments, began to face criticism, both from outside observers and reformers within the empire itself. This led to a series of sweeping changes known as the Tanzimat reforms. Laws were rewritten. Courts became more structured. Procedures were introduced to standardize trials and reduce arbitrary decisions. On paper, justice was becoming more predictable, regulated, and aligned with modern legal principles. Public punishments gradually declined, replaced by more formalized systems of imprisonment and legal process. The aim was to shift from fear-based control to institutional authority, a system where law, not spectacle, maintained order. But change did not happen overnight. For decades, old practices and new reforms existed side by side, creating tension between tradition and modernization. Some regions adapted quickly. Others held on to older methods longer than the empire intended. By the early 20th century, as the empire itself weakened and eventually dissolved, the justice system it had relied on for centuries faded with it. What remained was not just a record of laws and punishments, but a legacy, a reminder of how power once worked, and how even the most entrenched systems can eventually change.